In the wake of the failure that conservatives have left us, we now have the opportunity, indeed the imperative, of building a progressive movement that doesn't simply change which party controls Washington, but begins an era of reform that the country desperately needs. And as we've tried to be clear in different sessions, this won't be easy and it won't be simple. It's going to take a long time. It will require the largest mobilization ever this year to register people to vote, to educate them, to get them out to vote. We're going to have a major debate over the next months on the war, on the economy, on energy and health care. But we need to engage not just on issues, but as Norman Lear told us this morning, on kind of the basic terrain of country and God. As you saw in the civil rights panel discussion yesterday about looking back at the King and Kennedy years, even if we're successful, the tensions and pressures that come with dealing even with a sympathetic president are not easy and require us to have a great independence and strategic view. And so we wanted to end the conference with a final discussion about this strategic sense. Well, how are we thinking about this incredible moment going forward? And we wanted to bring people with very different angles of sight, but remarkable leaders in the progressive movement, to ask them both to discuss their own perspective, to have a conversation between them for a while, and then to give us some final words. They're going to introduce each other as they speak seriatim, but I want to just mention their names at once. David Bonior, who I will introduce, has just come off the John Edwards campaign, where he is his campaign manager. Cecile Richards is a special talent and is now the president of Planned Parenthood and the head of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. Deepak Bhargava is executive director of the Center for Community Change, an organization which is dedicated to empowering low-income people across the country. And Anna Berger is the head of Change to Win, 7 unions, 6 million workers, secretary-treasurer of SEIU, the largest union, oversees SEIU's political operations, where, as a footnote, they just helped do a lot of heavy lifting in the Donna Edwards challenge, successful challenge in the Maryland race. So these are 4 extraordinary leaders. We're going to start with David Bonior. I'm going to ask them each to speak for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to have a discussion. I first met David when he was leading the fight as a congressman against Reagan's grotesque wars in Central America. And he, in the Congress, was a true progressive on questions of foreign policy, of human rights, of trade and economics. This was a voice, really a true voice for workers. He, immensely respected by his colleagues, he became the majority whip and then, alas, the minority whip. He left the Congress to chair and serve as chair as Americans' Rights to Work, pushing to change our laws so that workers once more would have the elemental right to organize and to negotiate at the workplace. And then this last year, he left there to become the campaign manager for the John Edwards campaign. And I think all of us are in a debt to the John Edwards campaign. He opened that campaign in New Orleans. And he drove the debate. He was the first one to do universal health care, and the other candidates moved to match him. He was the first one to bring poverty and put it on the agenda. He was the first one to talk in a populist voice about what was going on in our economy. He was the first one to challenge the trade policies, and the other candidates moved his way. So to the extent that we have been successful in helping to drive a debate among Democrats so that the Democratic contenders now for the nomination are more populist and more bold and more clear about the war, about the economy, about health care than they were when they started the campaign, we owe a good portion of that to John Edwards and to David Bonior. It's a pleasure to introduce David Bonior.
Well, good afternoon to you all. It's wonderful to be here, and Bob, thank you for those kind comments. First of all, I want to thank you and Roger over here for your leadership, for steering us on this ship to progressivity, for bringing us together, for laying out some ideas, some plans, and hopefully developing here some strategies that will move us forward. As Bob said, I just came off of a presidential campaign, and not only as a campaign manager, but I did a lot of surrogate work. In other words, I was out in the field. I was out in Iowa, New Hampshire. I was in 70 of the 99 counties in Iowa having meetings with between 10 and 30 people, every county in New Hampshire. So I got a sense, a recent sense, of what is really going on out there in small towns all across America, and big towns as well. And I think it will come to no surprise to any of you here today that the message of change is carrying the day. The folks in the country see Washington, D.C. as broken. They see it controlled by the powerful and the special interest. They see their country at war. They see us in the grips of a recession. They see their country without a moral compass. But what they still have, and what has not been taken away from them, is a word that we've heard a lot of this campaign, and that's hope. You know, in Romans, it is said that when you struggle, you produce perseverance. And perseverance produces hope. And hope does not disappoint us. So what we've seen over these past year and a half, is incredible numbers of people participating in the political system. Enormous numbers, numbers unheard of, unprecedented numbers, all over this country, all over the country. And what people are saying is they want leaders who will show courage, who are not afraid to lead with new ideas and new ways, and they're rewarding those who are stepping up and providing that kind of leadership. The nation is indeed ready for progressive change, as more so, I would say, than any time in my life. And what Bob and Roger and all of you have done here, and what my brothers and sisters in the labor movement have done, and the other movements that are represented here today, is create the opportunity for that change. We have an unprecedented opportunity before us. I want to speak briefly to 4 areas where I think we can actually make a huge difference. And I'll tick them off, and then I'll talk about them for a minute each. Ending this war, empowering workers to join unions and thereby rebuilding the middle class in America. Thirdly, to create a new green energy economy. And fourthly, to fix this health care system with a universal health care in this country. And to do this, it's going to take an enormous, not only amount of energy, but strategic thinking, as Bob has said, planning every step of the way. It won't happen by itself. Just because X gets elected to the Congress or to the presidency doesn't mean it's going to happen. If you want justice, A. Philip Randolph, I think, said it best, justice is not given, it's exacted. You got to fight for it. No one's going to give it to you out of the goodness of their heart, or their wallets, or their pocketbooks, or their budget. You've got to stand up and you've got to fight for it, because believe me, the other side, the Nova Gorquist, the Tom DeLays, that whole world will be fighting very hard to retain what they have taken from the progressive movement, particularly over these past 35 years. Ending the war, number 1. Country's ready for it. Is there any doubt about that? The world is ready for it. Too many lives have been lost. Too many bodies have been broken. Our moral standing in the world has been destroyed. And of course, the cost in dollars is staggering. Joseph Stiglitz projected recently, we're talking about roughly $3 trillion, excuse me. It's one of the great colossal disasters in American history, this war. So the country is ready for that. And we have to be ready. And I know some of us are going to be ready right after this event to raise our voice and to make sure we end this war, bring our troops home, and reestablish our moral and credibility throughout the world today. So that's number one. The second one may come as a bit of a surprise to some of you because it's not talked about enough, although it has been talked about in this presidential campaign. That's why I'm particularly proud about how John Edwards led this debate in this campaign. And that's rebuilding the middle class and doing it through rebuilding the labor movement today. Now, for some of you out there who are in the environmental movement or the civil liberties movement or some other movements out there who are part of this grand coalition and who don't think that the labor movement is important, I really want to address this to you. You cannot have a progressive movement without a workers' movement and a labor movement. It just doesn't work. It hasn't worked historically. And we have a chance to change all of those union density numbers around by passing the Employee Free Choice Act. So join us in doing it. We passed it this last Congress in the House, 51 votes in the Senate. We're going to have a great opportunity to do that as we take over, hopefully, well, I guess I'm not supposed to say taking over the government, the rules of this conference, but I think you know where I'm going here. Every day in this country, people are fired for trying to organize a union. Every single day. And if we want to close that income gap, and we want to give people a voice at work, and we want to create the infrastructure to move even more the progressive movement, we have got to get this passed. So that is indeed a priority that I ask all of you to stand with us and join with us. You know, when the National Labor Relations Act was passed back in 1935, it was passed with the intention to increase union membership and thereby America's ability to buy more and to expand the nation's aggregate demand. It was passed not only as a social justice issue, but as an economic piece of getting the country moving again. And we are back there, and we need your help in making sure that we get that done. Thirdly, let's rebuild this country with the green, new energy economy. We need that done. I think all of you know that the resources are there to do that. The energy is there to do that. The country has accepted this idea as something that we need to do to go forward, and we can get it done. Progressives need to lead the way on conserving our natural resources and demanding the tools to get it done. Progressives need to be the ones that demand that we build a new energy, green economy job market, creating millions of new jobs. We ought to be doing things like they did at Berkeley, California, where they're requiring every homeowner to have, through their tax system, solar heat and water heat. It's a big city. It can get done all across this country. There are countless examples. And we can do it with good union jobs, too. We've got to marry that piece together with the overall idea of greening our economy. They're reducing gas house emissions by 80% by the year 2050. And then finally, I'll end with this, and maybe Anna and others will want to talk to it as well. Universal health care. How outrageous is it that here we are in one of the most prosperous countries in the world, that roughly almost 50 million people don't have any health insurance today. Costs are skyrocketing. We can do better. And I'm extraordinarily proud of John Edwards leading this debate, coming up with a universal plan a year ago, creating the opportunity in the path to move into a single-payer plan through his plan, making sure that it's universal and it's paid for. It's an outrage that people who are taking care of our families, our mothers and our fathers in nursing homes, are paid $9 and sometimes less an hour to care for them. We can do better. We can have better health care. We can have better organized health care. And believe me, the country is ready for that as well. So those are four big ideas. But the time is right. People are psychologically prepared to get these things done. And it's going to take each and every one of us here today pushing whomever is running the government to get them done. Remember, the pressure that you apply will pay enormous dividends in the future. Thank you.
Deepak Bhargava, our next speaker, is an extraordinary talent. He is the head of the Center for Community Change, as I said earlier. That is an organization with a network of community organizations across the country, which is dedicated to empowering people of low income and people in our urban areas and bringing them into the capacity to make real change. He came to that position after serving as the legislative director of ACORN, again working with low-income people. And he is one of the most eloquent analysts of progressive strategy, looking at it not from the top down like too many people in Washington do, but from the community up. And I look forward to the challenge that he will issue us today. Deepak.
Good afternoon. I'm so grateful to be here with you and so grateful for the work of the Campaign for America's Future. I do want to issue a challenge today about our progressive future. It does seem like the progressive bus that all of us have been moving down the highway is making some progress. And after 8 long years, 8 long and brutal years, that really is worth celebrating. But the big question for progressive today, I would submit to you, are who is on our bus? Who's driving the bus? Where is this bus going? Who might we run over along the way? So our history is instructive. Our Republican president, Richard Nixon, gave us affirmative action and proposed a guaranteed annual income for the poor. Our last Democratic administration gave us welfare reform, NAFTA, a disastrous crime bill, and a terrible immigration bill. Now, before you get violent on me, my point is not that elections do not matter. They matter a great deal. The point is that it is the strength of outside movements and who and what we hold to be at the moral and political center of our work that really determines our collective future. So as happens every even-numbered year, there will be massive voter mobilization efforts in low-income communities of color all across the country this year. The central question from my perspective is, will those constituencies be central or marginal to the progressive agenda after the election is fought and won? So this question is going to play out in very big and in small ways in 2009. So will we put justice for the survivors of Hurricane Katrina at the center of a 2009 agenda? How about eliminating or at least reducing poverty? What about a path to citizenship for 12 million undocumented immigrants who are living and working in the shadows and subject to incredible exploitation and abuse? And I have to say, the evidence of the last couple of years is not entirely heartening as we think about the agenda going forward. So as we speak, a small but hearty band of House Democrats are pushing to put a bill on the floor that would be just as bad as the Tancredo bill several years ago that sparked the mass mobilizations in the immigrant community. And that is, from my point of view, wresting defeat from the jaws of victory. Even in the context of the issues that we know will be up in 2009, these questions about race and class become central. So one of the hidden consequences of climate change legislation, which all of us rightly support, is that if we do nothing, the increase in energy prices would amount to a tax of $1,000 on the poorest 20% of Americans, who earn about $13,000 per year. So we will face a very real question about whether, as progressives, we are willing to hold as a bottom line including in that legislation provisions that hold the poor families harmless to any negative consequences on their income as part of climate change legislation. We know that there'll be a debate about universal health care next year. We also know from the S-chip debate that we just had that the leading wedge in that debate that will be used by conservatives is access to coverage for immigrants, including legal immigrants. So will we throw immigrants under the bus in the name of political expediency? And if we do, we should probably call the legislation health care for more of us, not health care for all of us. So my friend and colleague John Powell has made the case for an approach to progressive policy he calls targeted universalism, which is kind of a wonky way of saying a very important thing. The idea is that we should push for broad policies that in fact do benefit everyone, but in so doing we pay special attention to the most vulnerable parts of our coalition, typically in our society low-income people of color. That extra attention is necessary because our history shows that even historic advances of the kind that were achieved in the New Deal don't end up benefiting everyone, certainly not everyone most in need. The Federal Housing Administration created redlining. The unemployment insurance and AFDC system for a long time excluded low-income women and women of color. Now, I think it would be more, this is not just a moral issue of inclusion. It is also a strategic question. It's a question of whether we can show that electoral outcomes make a real and tangible difference in the actual day-to-day lives of poor people and people of color, and in so doing, replace what has become a vicious cycle of under-participation and under-delivery by politicians with a virtuous cycle of increasing participation and increasing delivery by politicians. And it's also a question of whether we want to build a progressive movement that can win not only today, but also in the demographically changing America that is now arriving. So, in conclusion, the challenge is to embrace three basic principles. First, the idea of community values, the idea that we are all in it together, that we are striving together to build a beloved community. That means that everybody is on the bus, we don't let anyone get run over, and especially not the most vulnerable, those who are experiencing the most suffering. Second, it means that we have a collective obligation to strengthen and build organizations in low-income communities of color, unions, community organizations, others, that can have an authentic voice for those constituencies, real power, so that in our larger progressive coalition, they are able to make their voices heard and have the clout to do so. Finally, that we not confuse the electoral road with a progressive bus. So this is a mistake that conservatives and the conservative movement never made. Elections are critical as means, they are not ends in themselves. So finally, the progressive challenge as I see it is we have, and I agree with Bob's framing, a historic once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make major changes in our society, in our economy, and in our movement itself. We will not achieve a progressive victory in this country without having the interests, the constituencies, the concerns of the people who are suffering the most in our society. We can't have progressive victory if we don't have an end to poverty and racial injustice in the society. So it's up to all of us to rise to that challenge of building that beloved community and making victory not just this year, but victory in 2009. Thank you very much. So it's my special honor to introduce somebody who I think of as the decathlete of the progressive movement. So she's been a community organizer, a labor organizer. She's done electoral politics. She's built a powerful national coalition to strengthen our ability to mobilize voters. She's been active in civil rights and economic justice, in women's rights, in the struggle in her current role for reproductive rights and freedom as head of Planned Parenthood for America. I can't think of a better, more inspiring leader than Cecile Richards.
Good afternoon. It's so dark out there. Are you guys okay? All right. Well, it's great to be here. I want to say before I start, so I don't break any more rules than I'm already planning on, I'm here today as the president of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. So that's our political arm, and so that's the caveat. Because the only thing that is reliable at the Campaign for America's Future conferences is the right wing always tapes me and puts it up on the web immediately. So I just want to so get the tapes rolling right now, guys. But that's the story. Okay, nothing. Before I start, I want to say that was unbelievable, Jim Gilliam. I mean, nothing better than a convert. I was just like. Warm my heart. Okay, it's great to be back at the annual Renaissance Weekend for Progressives. Thank you to Bob and Roger for bringing us all together, really. And as folks have said, it's an amazing time. I mean, people are voting like rabbits everywhere. Maybe that's just the job I have now. It's the way I think. But, I mean, it's amazing. My God, for 15 minutes, even Texas was important in this election. And as progressives, we're always in a really good mood when we're together, but there is something different this year. And I think it is that, 8 years in the wilderness, it finally feels like it might actually be our time. And I feel like the far right has finally worn out their welcome. Fear and division are stale, and the politics of change, as everyone has said, are in vogue, and that is a good thing because progressives are ready to lead, and the people of this country are ready for what we are bringing. It feels good for a change, and even for us most hard-bitten cynics. This is a real adjustment, because let's face it, I think as progressives we are great at finding fault with whoever is in office, but we're not so hot at being in charge. And I think it is going to mean something different, and I think Deepak's points were well made. It means actually we're going to have to work with some folks, though, that aren't perfect and that don't see everything the same way that we do. Because let's face it, there is only one Jan Schakowsky in the U.S. Congress, right? Although, hear the good news, because Donna Edwards is coming to Capitol Hill, and it's going to change America. But I think what folks have said and what is really important, I think if there is a theme here today, it is this: when progressives win in November, if we can say that, that's just the ticket to the dance. And it only means that we've got a fighting chance, and we're going to have to bring everything we've got to move this country forward. Because the last thing we need to do is replace compassionate conservatives with complacent progressives, right? That's just not going to work. Because we've seen how that works out. I think the challenge for us is not just to win in November, it's how do we keep winning in January and February and March and on and on. My dream is 24 years of uninterrupted progressive power. That's just, because I think that's what we're going to need actually to address a lot of the issues that have been raised here today. But so here's the two things I think about. In the next 7 months, we as progressives have an unbelievable opportunity to build our ranks. We have got to take the millions of Americans who are out there waking up politically this election, and we've got to attach them to our movement, whether it is labor or it's Move On or it's Acorn or it's Planned Parenthood. We've got to build long-term and sustainable grassroots movement like we haven't ever seen before, and we just don't get that many chances. So that's my plea to you. And the second thing is, and this is really from my role now where I sit at Planned Parenthood, which is we got to take organizations like Planned Parenthood and we got to get serious about politics. Because sometimes we don't need to just start new things. We got to take old things and make them new again. And, because we got a lot of stuff out there, and we got to make it work this time. So here's the deal. Planned Parenthood is the largest, most respected reproductive health care provider in America, has been for 91 years. We have more than 850 health centers in every state in America. We see 5 million patients every single year for health care. 97% of it's preventative health care. 2.3 million women for birth control. 900,000 breast exams last year. 1.3 million cervical cancer screenings. The list goes on and on and on. And the truth is that awesome? I mean, my God. Okay, thanks. But here's the deal. The women and teens who come to our clinics, they're not coming to make a political statement. They come to us because for most of them, we're the only health care option they have in this country. But when they come to us, and when women come to us, they're coming to us for more than birth control pills. They count on us to fight for their rights, and everyone's right, to full reproductive health care in this country, period, right? That's the deal. They are counting on us to speak up and to speak out, and make no mistake, this election we will. And this is why, because if we don't, we aren't doing our job, all right? Listen to this. Last week, the Centers for Disease Control, you may have seen this, reported that 1 in 4 teenage girls in America has a sexually transmitted infection. That's 1 in 4 of our girls. And now that is what $1.5 billion of abstinence-only programming will buy you, okay? Now, we can open up Planned Parenthood clinics from here to eternity. But if we don't get folks in office who understand that teens in America need education, not just a right-wing slogan, then we have failed, my friends. You know, we have funded, it's true, we have funded Planned Parenthood programs around the world to reduce maternal mortality, and it's important work. But if the global gag rule of this country makes it illegal for women to get freaking family planning, it's not going to work, you know? It's not going to work, and we aren't doing our job. And we can open up Planned Parenthood clinics in every small town and community in America, but it isn't worth a damn if the next president appoints the 5th right-wing Supreme Court justice who votes to overturn Roe versus Wade, okay? It's not going to work. It's not enough. So that's the deal. So this year, we're putting it all on the line. And the Planned Parenthood Action Fund is taking our millions of supporters, and we're putting them on the doors and in the streets. Folks who are patient escorts today, this summer, they're knocking on doors. Our board members are becoming phone bankers. We are literally mobilizing 1 million strong, 1 million of our supporters in critical states. And in doing so, we are going to elect a president that, as David said, will fight alongside us to make affordable health care a right in this country, not a privilege, right? We're going to elect a president who believes that women are actually fully capable of making decisions about bearing children and do not need the help of a bunch of desiccated U.S. senators to interfere. No, gracias. No, thank you. And come hell or high water, we are going to elect a president who's going to take this $1.5 billion disaster known as abstinence only and end it and replace it with real sex education for young people in America. So that's what we got to do. So in short, and this is my plea to those of you who are in organizations who need to make this launch, to make this step. This year, the largest reproductive health care provider in the country aims to become the largest kick-ass grassroots organization in America fighting for our health and rights, and not just in November, but more importantly, after November. Because candidates and elections come and go, as David said, but the progressive movement continues on. Got it? All right. So I'll just end with this. Look, I'm going to be damned if we're going to stand by and let George Bush or Samuel Alito or John McCain dismantle the right of women in this country to choose. Game over, right? So all I need to know is, are you going to stand with us? Are you with us? Because if you are, we're going to stand with you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, you don't have to say okay, but thanks. All right, we're all standing together. It is my distinct honor to introduce another pissed off woman. A partner in every way, one of my own personal heroes. Can you imagine there is a woman in this country that is brave enough and strong enough to lead a major labor organization, Change to Win? I mean, I've been in the labor movement. That takes some doing. The Secretary-Treasurer of the Service Employees International Union, a woman who hasn't stopped moving since she organized her very first walkout, my colleague and friend, Anna Berger.
Thanks, Cecile. And it's true, I am another pissed off woman who's ready to move and ready to act and ready to get stuff done. And I'm proud to be with all of the panelists. I'm especially excited to hear about what Planned Parenthood plans on doing in terms of moving their organization into a kick-butt or kick-ass organization, because that's what we all need to do. And I want to talk a little bit about how we do that in SEIU and what that means in terms of SEIU and how we are your partners in the field so that you understand why we sometimes get a little aggressive because of the way that we think about our work. You know, in 1996, Andy Stern was elected president of SEIU, and we decided that we needed to transform our union, that we needed to grow the voice of working people again, and that we needed to do our politics in a different kind of a way. That politics was really about members and their issues. So we had to be a member-driven organization, a member-driven political program that was tied to the issues, not parties, that we understood that we had permanent issues, not permanent candidates or permanent officials or permanent friends. And that we needed to change that so that we could win health care for every single man, woman, and child in America, so that we could win the voice for workers on the job, so that we could recreate the American dream. And because of that, we now have members who are enthusiastically engaged like never before. They do knock on doors, and they are an incredible grassroots operation. They do raise voluntary political dollars so that we can put our dollars to work. And they are workers who are incredibly good at agitating around issues. And they make me proud because of their determination, because of their leadership, because of their willingness to participate and lead the National Journal so that we were the best grassroots political operation in 2006. And we plan on being better. As active as our members are, however, they are frustrated at what happens or doesn't happen in their cities, in their states, and in their country. Because they knock on doors, they make phone calls, they talk to their coworkers, their neighbors, their family, their friends. They convince people to vote for candidates based on what the candidate says, only to be disappointed that when that candidate becomes an elected official, about what they do. Our members are ordinary people who come together to do extraordinary things. And they expect that when they support candidates, that they should talk the talk, but that they should walk the walk. And so for us, our members are incredibly frustrated when their candidates only talk it and don't walk it. So we decided that we really needed to rebalance our political program, that we needed to think not just about elections, but we needed to think about accountability. And so in 2004 at our convention, we launched an accountability program that will continue to expand. In 2004, we did it by challenging our members and our leaders to nominate or charge an elected official who had done us wrong. And we had Judge Mathis be the judge, and our convention delegates were the jury, and the stage of the trial was the stage of our convention. And based on the overwhelming evidence of the members from Washington State, they were able to prove that a Washington State legislator, the chair of the Appropriations Committee, who had slashed health care, who had slashed unemployment benefits, who had slashed things for working people and education, we found her guilty, and we launched an accountability campaign. So we challenged her in a primary. Her opponent was a long-term community activist, somebody who stood for working people. And she fought hard, but she lost. But she showed elected officials in Washington State that you couldn't take working people for granted. Now, she lost, but we won, because that elected official in Washington State has been much better than ever before, and now I'm happy to say she's announced her retirement. Once was bad enough, she didn't want to do it a second time. And that motivated our members. In the last 4 years, we've made accountability a cornerstone of our political program. We are demanding that the voice of working people be heard. We tell politicians that they have to be accountable to real people, and that we will back that up with concrete action. Now, we know that we can't, just like we can't elect candidates by ourselves, that we can't hold them accountable by ourselves, that we need to work with our families and friends, that we need to work with the Progressive Alliance, the Progressive Movement, to build something that really can have the focus, have the resources, and have the plan. And that's why we helped create and launch They Work For Us. Now, They Work For Us is very simple. It's about educating voters before and after Election Day about what their elected official is doing. It's shining the light on elected officials' behavior in their home district so they can't hide from it, about what they're doing on economic issues that really matter. Because we want to change bad behavior. We want to take them on or take them out. So just ask Congressman Dan Boren from Oklahoma. Now, he's a bad vote for working people. He's a bad vote on health care for kids and the expansion of S-chip. He was a bad vote on Voice for Working People and EFCA. And so we couldn't believe that his voters in Oklahoma really understood what he was doing. So we decided to educate them a little bit. And we ran an ad in his district talking about what he did or didn't do for kids. And guess what? We only ran that ad one little couple of days. And Congressman Boren has now pledged to vote for S-chip for kids. So it works. Now, we've changed his behavior once. Let's see if we can change it a whole lot or whether we have to change him. Which kind of takes me to the Donna Edwards Al Wynn. Wasn't that great? We knew we could have somebody better than Al Wynn representing us, and we knew his district deserved it because his district was a progressive district and deserved to have somebody who would stand up and not just vote sometimes, but would lead and speak out and be an advocate for them day in and day out. So we rejected the status quo and we supported Donna Edwards. And we in SEIU knocked on 5,000 doors, made 10,000 phone calls, had 300 people members on election day knocking on doors, and we spent about $800,000 on the TV ads, holding out his record and laying out hers. And along with the UFCW and the Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters and MoveOn.org and Emily's List and ACORN and Women's Voice, Women's Vote, we all came together and we stood up to the Democratic leadership in the Congress and said, who wanted to protect him, and said, not a chance. We are going to elect a progressive, and we did. And we should be proud of that because we have to do that more. But it's not just about primaries. It's also about taking on challenges in the status quo. We just took on Denny Hastert's seat, right? The Republicans said that they owned that seat. Well, we have to teach a lesson that no one owns a seat. A party doesn't own a seat. A candidate doesn't own a seat. The voters own the seat. And because of the work that we did, we now have Bill Foster, who ran on an economic agenda for working families. So in SEIU, we look at 2008 and the election day in terms of how do we get ready now? How do we knock on doors? How do we make phone calls? How are we in the streets? About the issues that matter to working people. To make the candidates understand that they have to stand up for us and vote with us, and that we are out in the streets educating the voters about these candidates and what they really say and what they really do. So next month, SEIU is launching a bus caravan that will go all around this country talking about health care. We will be there to speak up for our heroes and heroines who stand with us, and we will be there to point out the candidates and the members of Congress who don't stand with us in health care. We will take on the Republican nominee, and we'll take on the Democratic nominee, I guess I have to say that too, in terms of what they stand, because we will expose their records. At every single stop, we will ask them, what will they do about health care? Because the truth is, on health care, the American people have spoken. It's time for action, and it's time for accountability, and we will get this done. We also know that we need to recreate the American dream for working families again. So in targeted districts across this country, we will be knocking on doors. We will be talking to voters about workers' right to have a voice on the job and how we can rebuild the American middle class. And we will expose the candidates who support us and those who don't, because we believe that we need to be out there tying the issues to the candidates. And all along the way, whenever we see a candidate or whenever we see an elected official, we will remind them about accountability. Because this election is not about a party, it's not about prestige, it's not about a perk. It's about real people, and it's about time they understand that. So I know that accountability has taken some hard knocks across this country. We can ask the families who have kids in Iraq. We can ask the children who don't have health care because of the lack of expansion of S-chip. Or we can talk to the workers who are losing their homes or facing foreclosures. But I think the reality is that we should be excited because accountability is starting to take hold in places where it matters the most, with voters. Voters want to stand up against the lies and greed in this country. They want candidates who actually do work for them. They're ready to say, are you going to work for us? And hold them accountable to that. And I go around the country a lot, knocking on doors and meeting with my members and helping them campaign and campaigning alongside them. And I hear about change and I hear about accountability, and I see people getting over their cynicism and being willing to believe again that they together can take action and take back our country. And so if voters trust that we can do this together, then we have to be ready to stand up and make sure that the next Congress and the next president delivers for them. This has to be the beginning of our commitment to accountability. We have to make sure that when we win this election, we hold them accountable. And that includes holding our friends accountable and holding the leadership accountable to do what's right, so that they remember what they ran on and that they remember that they work for us, not for K Street. Now, you know they're saying that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, for SEIU, what happens in the field stays in the field. We have a great grassroots political action operation in the field, and they are staying in the field. They are not going home when we win on November 4th. They are staying right there, and they are turning their action into an agitation campaign around the issues that matter. And that's what accountability is all about. It means that we do the same job after Election Day that we do before Election Day, that we talk about the issues and we expose the records and we agitate until we get what we need to get done. Because we are here about reclaiming the American dream for the next generation. We're here because real people matter. And I'm here because people in SEIU matter, and they use their skills, they use their talent, they use their passion to make a difference for themselves, but more importantly for the next generation. They do it because they believe that when they come together, that they can do extraordinary things. And that's why we need to hold them accountable. And I know today that we're going to all march on the White House. We're going to all go down and demonstrate because we need to raise our voices. And so when you do that, I want you to think about somebody who it matters to. And for me, I'll think about Connie Gallagher. Connie Gallagher is a nurse in Iowa. And I door knocked with her in 2006 election, right at the end of October, the beginning of November. We were door knocking together. And she had worked a long shift, and there she was knocking on doors talking about health care and talking about the war. And as we were knocking, I asked her what motivated her, what made her move and do this. And she said, well, she has a son named James. And she said James was a plumber, and he'd been learning his trade for a number of years, but he still didn't have health care. And James was really worried about that. And one night he came home and he said to his mom, Mom, I joined the National Guard, and now I have health care. And Connie begged him not to do it. And he said, Mom, don't worry. They promised me that they won't ship me off to Iraq. And they did. And he was there for 18 months. And Connie's fortunate. He did come back home alive. But Connie said to me that day that the reason that she was door knocking was because no child should have to go to war because they don't have health care. And Connie continues to knock on doors, and she will continue to fight to bring other people's children home and to make sure all of them have health care. And so we face an incredible challenge, an incredible opportunity when we go down to the Hill to have our voices heard. Because in 2006, a lot of voters, a lot of people we talked to, went to vote because they wanted to bring an end to the war and they wanted to reclaim the middle class. We need to let our officials know that they have a lot of work to do. And I believe that if we stand together, if we stand up, if we speak out, that we can in fact bring our troops home, that we can in fact reclaim the American dream, that we can in fact reclaim our country and change the world. Thank you very much.
Okay, we each have mics, which I think are on. We're sitting on these teetering chairs to just add a little risk to the conversation. Right. And I want to push on some of the fault lines that usually disappear in these discussions when we line up together and do solidarity, which is, it's a little bit about what Deepak said, but it's implicit in Cecile's agenda too. If you look at the war vote, a huge portion of people here and across the country thought that Democrats, once they had a majority, could end the war. And the most progressive speaker in the history of the U.S. House of Representatives did a remarkable job of getting a bill that would get the troops out at a date certain through the House. Reid got it through the Senate by some kind of miracle. They put it on the president's desk, and he vetoed it. At which point the question was, would you just not send any money at all? And there's a whole bunch of progressives across the country who thought, just don't give them any money. And Pelosi's argument, I believe, was she couldn't hold her caucus if she tried to do that, and that it would split. So and you've then had the disappointment across the country, the progressive side, you know, we elected you to end this thing and it's still going on. What's happening? So how do progressives deal with this question of pushing but either respecting leadership, or how do you make the decision about accountability in a way that understands their position or decides not to understand it and to push through it? I think these are really hard questions, in fact, once we get a little bit of power. Hopefully less hard when we get more power and bigger majorities, but still real questions. And it also goes to the splits in the issue agenda. You know, choice divides Democrats. Immigrants and the immigrants question is going to be one of the fault lines that Republicans are going to try to use in districts. And you can hear the Democratic Congressional Committee telling Democratic candidates, be cautious about what you're saying on this. How do you, either in your organization or as a progressive activist, weigh in this kind of tension when you think about holding people accountable, which we surely must do? Anyone? I would sort of like you to mix it up with each other.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead, Cecile.
That's all right. Anna looked like she was ready.
Yeah, I think that this is about accountability. And I think, you know, I've said to Nancy Pelosi and other members of the leadership team that I think things like they work for us in terms of turning up the heat in the field is something that we would like their best friend. If they want to get a progressive agenda through, having an accountability system in the field where we actually have members of the community knocking on doors, raising the issues, agitating around something is really important. If you think about what we did last summer in Americans Against the Escalation of the War, we did Iraqi Summer, where we had in targeted districts, obviously we didn't win them all, but we moved some. We turned up the heat and did continual following of shadowing of candidates. I mean, the reason that Mitch McConnell is going to have a race this time is because he was so beaten up in his home district about the war. Now, will he probably win? Maybe. But he's going to have to spend a whole lot of money in his own home state of Kentucky as opposed to other places. But I think, though, that if we are in the streets, if we are unified around our issues, and I'm fortunate, my union, we're pro-choice, we're anti-war, we're pro-immigrant, we're, you know, pro-working families agenda, so we're out there on all the issues. But we need to agitate. We need to keep in the field. We need to expose records, and we shouldn't back down.
Well, I think, so I'll be more conservative and say...
Oh, no, Cecile.
Well, are we supposed to mix it up? We're supposed to sort of like disagree with each other? No, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with Anna. I just think that, look, these are hard issues. So I think that we got to do sometimes things that, not just things that make us feel good, but things that actually get what we need to get done. And so I just think it's, as a progressive movement, we just got to be more sophisticated than probably we have been. And that's one of the things about, it's one thing to take pot shots at everybody in power. It's another thing to actually say, we're ready to govern, because that's a lot more complicated. David Bonior can tell us more about that than probably anybody. And I do think Nancy Pelosi is the most progressive Speaker of the House that we'll certainly see in my lifetime. And when she says she can't hold her caucus, she probably knows that fact. But I think it does mean we're always going to have a left flank that's out there agitating and organizing. And I think to the extent we're pushing people to the limit, we got to be ready and bring the troops to support them. You know, it's I think sometimes as progressives, we just think people should do things just because it's the right thing to do, and it's just not how politics works. I think we've got to be able to back it up with folks and with organizing. And that's why I think what everyone said is really critical, that it's not election day is just like, it's just a moment in time. What really matters is what we can bring after election day.
Bob, you raised a really difficult question, and let me just give you my thoughts on it. I was of the view, as was John Edwards during this whole debate, as you recall, that we should keep sending George Bush back a bill time after time after time. I have the highest regard for Nancy Pelosi. She's a dear friend and great leader, and for the leaders in the Senate as well. But I think we made a mistake. And it's easier for me to say that now that I'm not in the leadership anymore, but I do think we did. If you look at the polling numbers nationally, they dipped enormously when the Democrats did not deliver on the war issue. and when they weren't seen fighting as hard as they could. There are some issues, not every issue, but there are some issues where leadership has to stand its ground, even if it has to take a numerical defeat on the floor of the House or the Senate. That was one of them, in my humble opinion. And you know, 5 years ago, Jim McDermott and a colleague of mine from California and myself went to Iraq in October, 6 months before the war, to try to stop it. 3 of us were Vietnam-era veterans. And it was not an easy thing to do. We were vilified not only by the right and the center, but by the left as well for going. But we saw what was coming. We lived the experience of the Vietnam War. And this was an important point in our country. I'm talking now about what transpired in the Congress over this last year on this war. We cannot afford to be in Iraq for another 4 more years. We have to get out. We have to get out in a reasonable, thoughtful way without endangering the troops that are there, but we have to leave. And for those who are suggesting that we're there for 100 years or for another 5 or 6 years, that is not acceptable. That is disaster for the progressive movement. And we have, as Anna said, have to make those people who buck the leadership accountable. That's where the pressure needs to be. And the problem we face right now on the war issue, and I'll be quiet because I don't want to eat I'm eating up too much time. The problem we face here on the war issue is that the sacrifices are being made by only a few in this country. In Vietnam, everybody, most people, often were on the line. And we've got to bring the heat to make people respond in a, not only a progressive, but in a decent and humane way. And we haven't done that, and we need to do it.
Well, look, I strongly agree with Anna that accountability is the name of the game, and that if we don't use the time this year to define an issue environment on health care, on immigrant rights, on economic justice, on all these issues, then we will not have set the stage for the kind of public conversation that we need to have next year. I also think we just have to recognize that there's a complicated relationship between outside organizations and movements and people in power. And I think one of the difficulties this last period is that people in power have not seen themselves as having enough responsibility to help build the power on the outside. So something like the Employee Free Choice Act is a perfect example, right? So if I was thinking, how do I build a constituency for the long term that can make America really progressive? That goes on the top of the list, not number 10 or 15. If I'm thinking about how do I embrace a new voting bloc that's going to be a big part of progressive victory for 20 and 30 years down the line, I think I want those 12 million undocumented immigrants and people who are waiting for their loved ones to come over to see the Democratic Party as the one that has brought legalization and justice to bear in the debate. But that's a way of thinking about how to build a broader coalition, how to build a broader base of power that I think we don't often enough see. And I do think you're correct. It's going to be a challenge to think about how to bring the outside and the inside together in a constructive and mutually reinforcing way. And I think it's going to require some shifts on both sides of that ledger. But the outside should never be afraid of accountability, because without accountability, we are fully capable of seeing neoliberal economic policies and a race to the bottom. We've seen it before. We have the evidence. It's not like NAFTA and welfare reform and the crime bill were a century ago. They were 10 years ago. So it's up to us to make sure that doesn't happen again.
If we're going to build a progressive movement that can actually govern for, in Cecile's formulation, for 24 years, I don't know where you got 24 from, but that was pretty good.
By then I'm in a nursing home. That's what it was like. You know.
But for a generation, and does reforms over a generation, we obviously need leaders that are accountable to an independent movement. But I think the thing I was trying to push for in the first question, I want to try to make another run at it, don't we have to have a governing consciousness that's different than a protest consciousness? That is, not just a sense of we're going to offer, Van Jones suggested we got to offer, we're moving to offer solutions, not just problems, but a greater sophistication about strategy to build our allies, about what we can get done and what we're prepared to see as the, okay, now we got to build again to get to the next stage and push them on that we have a more of a staged sense rather than a sense that if we can just take this, we win, and if we don't win, then they've betrayed us. I mean, there is, it seems to me, on our side, a different kind of consciousness that comes with power that we need to have, as well as the leadership's needing to demand that the leadership understand we're going to keep the heat on them, and we're not going to allow what happened the last time we had a Democratic president.
Well, I guess going back to that television, so I'd say, who's this us Kimosabe, So I think our power derives not from proximity to elected officials who have power, but from our ability to actually move a local base in local places that holds them accountable. So if we're shrinking on the ground, or we're not exercising real political power and putting pressure on, as Anna was saying, then we can't really hope for the kind of power relationship that's reciprocal in the kind that you're suggesting. If we can demonstrate that level of power and influence and growth and energy, then we have a right to demand a reciprocal relationship where that kind of adult conversation can happen about, okay, what is the staging of the different things we're going to get done, and what is good enough? But that has to happen in a context of power, not in a context of weakness or supplication.
I think that I know what you're talking about, and I don't think it's an easy answer, but is a governing conscience is a different thing. I think we've done a pretty good job in the progressive movement of pulling together before the election. I mean, for many of us and many of the people in this room, the last 6 years have been spent trying to get our act together so that we're not just 1,000 flowers blooming. We got to now do that on the other side as well, because I think I think the right was very successful in doing this, of sort of coming together and not leaving anybody off the bus, but saying, okay, these are the things we're going to really push for together, so that we're clear with folks, not that we're too close to them, but that we're clear to them about this is it. So it is healthcare access for every single American. And I think that that's the opportunity we have now, and that's work we got to do, because you're right, we can't squander another 8 years, another 12 years by it being everybody, on their own ship, trying their own thing. And that's just a level of sophistication I think we haven't had, and frankly, an opportunity we haven't had for a while.
And I'd say that through America Votes and other organizations, we've come together to figure out how we can more strategically door knock and elect people. We haven't come together post-election to really think about how do we move our agenda together, and how do we understand that we have one agenda and it's a common agenda that we can move. And I do know, I understand, I am an agitator, but I also believe in making progress. So this isn't trying to figure out how to get the perfect done tomorrow. The challenge is how do we make progress? And how do we really move this forward? But I just want to tie into the accountability again. I think that for too long we had too many candidates who were thinking about their election and not about how we were electing a progressive majority. And that if we were really thinking about this election, which I think most of us are now, in terms of how do we make November 2008 about electing a progressive majority, it changes what we can do, because we really would have the votes in a much broader way, and it's around a progressive agenda. So I would say that if we can figure out how we sit down post-election to figure out how we collaborate on the issues, how we also expect to be at the table, strategizing, that this isn't something that Congress does by themselves, this is something that they do in cooperation and collaboration with us at the table about how we move it forward. But I do think that we have to move things, we have to look at it through the lens of, is this progress, not is this perfect?
I would agree, but also I would add to that political folks in the Congress or in the state legislatures, assemblies, by nature are cautious. They're cautious individuals. I mean, if they have a choice between something bold and a baby step, they'll go baby step. That's generally the mindset of political people. We have a unique opportunity, I think, coming up before us, to be bold and to take advantage of the time that we are in. This is a unique time. They have taken apart the right, what the New Deal and the progressives put together since FDR. They've pretty well dismantled a good part of what we did, okay? And this recession we're in, for instance, Harold Meyerson speaks very well to this. It's going to take more than just what we've done in the past on recessions. That's going to take some really structural, major structural changes in the economy, some bold thinking. And the country, believe me, is ready for that. And they're ready for major decisions on universal health care. They're ready for the whole new green energy economy. They're ready for empowering workers. And speaking of strategies, I mean, we have been working on, I haven't actually been on a campaign, but I know American Rights at Work has been working with many folks in this room here on a strategy to get us to 60 votes in the Senate, okay, to get the Employee Free Choice Act passed. And that's been going on for a while now. And we're thinking about that. We're thinking about how the accountability piece applies to individual senators, because basically that's what we're talking about here. We're going to get it passed in the House, and how to get that done. We cannot be timid in this next year, year and a half. It's going to provide us an enormous opportunity, assuming the elections go in a progressive manner, to get a lot done. You know, it's going to be hard. The Employee Free Choice Act, for those of you who don't remember, we've been trying to get this done since Taft-Hartley. We failed in the 60s because we made a decision back in the 1960s that we were going to do the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. All that came first, and it was Walter Reuther who said basically back then, that's more important. Great labor leader, okay? So we didn't get it done. We used up all of our capital. Then when Carter became president, we didn't get it done because we couldn't get the 2 senators out of Georgia. We were 2 votes shy of getting labor law reform passed. And the same thing happened under Clinton. He couldn't get the 2 senators out of Arkansas. Now that's not accountability. Yeah. And we have to make sure whoever is sitting in that White House understands how damn important this is, and that they are going to be held accountable, and that we're not going to settle for baby steps. Because you know, the time is running out on a lot of people in this country, and we need some bold leadership to step up and take care of these things.
So I promised you each last words. This is the last session for what's been an extraordinary conference. Here are 1,000 activists. Last words, if beyond what David just told us?
It's pretty sweet.
Leave it at that.
Be bold.